Hey everyone. After our little Google Hangout today, I promised that I was going to do a demo for you on just a few reviewing of things on setting up your grid for the interior of your publications, and then also show you how to set up paragraph styles and character styles, which are super helpful when you're working on long form. Um, Again, several things just to review from today that we talked a little bit about was hierarchy, being very clear about what element in your composition is like the first thing, or what I call the hook. Thinking about contrast and how can you achieve contrast in many different ways. There are many different ways. Um, Starting to think about extreme contrast, for example, really small type versus really large type, or vice versa, because not the way you achieve hierarchy is not always through large means. It's not always about being huge. Sometimes it's about being very small and detailed. And a lot of typography is about a lot of detail. Looking at the spacing, looking at the leading. Are the lines too tight? Are the words too tight? Are they too loose? Do they need to be looser? These are details that you need to be aware of, and there's many different ways of helping you achieve this in InDesign. And in the next few weeks, I'm gonna show you a few things to do. So when you're dealing with type, so let me start here with InDesign. And again, I'm just gonna start from scratch, where InDesign likes to go into picas. You can always change that. Can say click OK, for example, and you can go to InDesign, go to your preferences, and you can go to units and increments and change that to inches, for example. And now you can go ahead and do things that would be in inches, right? Then you can go to File, Document Setup, and we can go to, for example, a 6x9, which is the size of our publication, right? So right now it's one page. It's facing pages because you want that facing pages. Remember, in a book, page 1 and the last page are by themselves, right? And as you're going to notice, in your pages here, you will start to see, if you add pages, you start to see spreads, right? So you're seeing double-sided, 2 pages side by side. And that's key because, again, remember, in a publication, you're working in multiples of 4. So you must have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24 pages and so forth and so on. So you want to be aware of that. Right now, right, this document has even margins all around. That's the standard format, standard template that InDesign has. And your margins, of course, are this pink purple line. Then you have this 1/4 inch margin, right? And then the gray area, it's the edge of the page. It doesn't exist, right? So one of the things you want to do is, let's say you want to adjust the margins. You can go to the master pages, which I recommend you start getting used to doing, because what it does is all the pages have these little A. You can make as many masters as you want, but that means any format that you set to the master pages will show up in those corresponding pages that are based on that master page. So for example, you can set up layout, margins, and columns. So you can say, yes, I want everything is 1/2 inch margin, which is very sort of modernist. But if you want to do, for example, Fibonacci sequence or more classical, the proportions are top to left 1, right, to 2 out on the outer edge here, to 3 at the bottom. Notice it's a mathematical equation, right? 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 1 = 3, right? So for example, if the margin up at the top is 1/2 inch, you want to unlock this so that you can control each individually. 1/2 inch, the inside is 1/2 inch, the outside is 1 inch, and the bottom is going to be 1.5 inches, right? So, and you click on your preview, and oops, by the way, let's see. There you go. Notice that I only clicked on the left side of the page. So that's the only one where things are applying. So I want to cancel that and make sure that if you hold the shift key, you can select both pages. Again, you go to layout, margins. So let's say that 1/2 inch margin is a lot. But again, you want to start thinking, what does that space allow me to do? When I'm setting up the grid, what elements do I need? Could that big area at the bottom be where you put the footnotes, right? So think about in the setting up of your grid, what are the elements that are going to be on the page? Page numbers, marginalia, footnotes, pull quotes, any of that. So again, it's top ½ inch, inside ½ inch, outside 1 inch, bottom 1.5 inch. And again, you can play with this. This is not, I'm just giving you an example, okay? You want to, this area here, which is where the bind would be, in a perfect bound book, like a book you buy at a bookstore, that's very important because this will be glued. So you want to make sure that this margin here is really open, so that when you open the book, you don't lose content into it. So notice that it's 2/3 of the page is now set up. This is a Fibonacci sequence. You can go back here and notice that that's the way it works, right? If you want to, for example, you can also do this. And this is a rules of thirds sometimes. And you can use one column, but you can still do this. You could go to create guides, right? And what you could do is you can create the rules of thirds. So you can say 3 and 3, right? And you always want to do on the margin. You don't want to go on the page. Now this gives you modules that you can start playing with a little bit. What I want you to be aware is that the gutter space here, this space between the columns, is directly related to the leading of your copy. So it's a direct proportion of that, okay? So be aware of that. That spacing is really important. If it's too tight, the reader reads through. If it's too loose, the reader doesn't understand the relationship, okay? Or potentially could not understand the relationship. So let's say that I'm just going to use this for the sake of it. Again, on a traditional publication, you start on the right-hand side page. And this is not the cover, just for the sake of this exercise. This is the interior of the book, right? So let's say that I'm going to set up a big letter A. I'm just going to do a big initial cap. And I'm going to show you a few tricks. And I'm going to go for like this humongous, might be too big, 200-point initial cap. And what's really funny is that I don't have the Swiss on this typeface. I'm going to use Antique, which is another serif face similar to Swiss, but you're going to be using Swiss, right? So there's several things I could do. I can set it like that, and it's just like, let's say that that's my initial A, right? I can set it that way. I could also copy, if you hold the Option key, if you hold if you see when you click it and it gives you those points, if you hold the Option key, you move over, it makes a copy. To outline it, which turns it into a vector, right? You go to Type, Create Outlines, and now this is a vector, as if you were in Illustrator. Notice the points are there. So now, I know some of you were starting to play with this, I can grab the points, like if I was in Illustrator, and I can, oops, sorry. You grab the, let's say I'm going to grab that point, right? And and now I can start pulling those points out, right? So this is one trick. My suggestion to a lot of you is just stay simple with this letter. You can come over here and you can outline it. The outline is fairly good if you have one character. Like let's say that's actually really good. So let's say that that's my hook, right? You can play with it. You can enlarge it. Let's say I want it to bleed out, so it starts there. And then you want to bring in your copy. I'm going to, again, use Type, fill in placeholder text. This is just placeholder text. I'm using Antique again, just on this for the sake of it. And again, notice that the standard size is 12 points, leading 14, metrics, kerning. Metrics, again, being the measurement that the type designer gave the letters, each pair of letters. I'm going to go to optical because it's body copy. This particular typeface is a very good looking typeface. Notice I'm dropping my text in there and I'm going into the margin there. I'm fitting it in. This particular text looks very good in 12 point. But let's say that I want to go to 10 point. So I'm going to go to 10 point type, right? And remember, you're not on the baseline, so you haven't set the baseline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the baseline, right? The baseline being the line where each line of copy sits. The leading is the space between those two lines, right? So I'm going to go to InDesign, Preferences. I'm going to go to Grids, set normally to 12 points. That means there's a baseline every 12 points. I want to have flexibility, so I'm going to set it to 3, which means I can start playing with divisibles of 3 for the leading, for the baseline, for the gutter. So for example, I'm going to go here and go to 9, and then that could go 9 over 12, right? So 9 points over 12 point, 9 point type size over 12 leading. That means the space between these lines is 12 points. And if you want to look at that, right now it's not on the baseline. You can click on hyphenate on the paragraph palette, that little hamburger at the bottom. There's 2. If you click on the one to the right, that sets it into the baseline. And you can look at the baseline, go to view, and go to show baseline grid. And if you blow it up, you start to see that the lines sit on that baseline. If they don't sit on the baseline, you will see, oops, let's see. You will see this. Notice how they sit in between, see? That's not correct. You want your type to be on the baseline grid, okay? So, again, like I said, I would not recommend working with the baseline grid on because it's distracting. So what I do is I just grids and guides, high baseline grid, and there it is. One of the things that you want to do, for example, let's say I'm starting with this big initial cap, I can do a wraparound. So if I click on this element, I can do, all of a sudden I forgot where my wraparound, so you go to Window, Text Wrap, there it is. And you can pull it out, and you can give it that, and you can control, notice that you can control how much space you want to the right or to the left, right? So that you can control it if you want text to overlap or not, the top, the bottom, right? So notice how that's doing. Notice I want you to be paying attention to this rag. This is called a rag. The idea of this rag is that it's even as possible. You also want to start thinking about hyphenation. Sometimes you will not be allowed to hyphenate because some jobs standards, editorial standards are no hyphenation. So if that's the case, you could take a hyphenation off. But keep in mind, when hyphenation is off, this gets wilder. The rags get wilder, right? I want you to start looking at the space after. How do you show, not just pressing return, but I want you to start thinking how you can control this space. Not just by hitting return and tabbing. I want you to start thinking how many different ways, right, can I do this so that the reader understands. That habit that we have is just hitting return. That's not correct because you may end up using a lot of space on returns. So one way to do that is you could use the space after. So if you set the cursor over here, right in your paragraph palette, there's this little area called space after right here. You can control that. So that means that anytime there's a return, when we do the, when I show you how to do the style sheets, anytime there's a return, you can control that space after and automatically puts it, right? It's the same way you can say, I can put the cursor here and I can control how much indentation that first line gets, right? Instead of tabbing. And again, if I follow the rules of 3 points, because I'm working with a baseline of 3, I can start playing with numbers that are divisible by 3 for all the measurements. Therefore, everything starts to become proportionate rather than just random choices, right? Again, keeping in mind that, you want to start playing with the leading. For example, if you do 3, some people do 1.5 baseline grid, so that gives you more flexibility if you do the math. I'm doing 3, so let's say my next leading size is 15, so I go to 15. Notice that everything bumps down, right? Is that too loose? I don't know. What am I trying to do? I can select this text. Here is where you add tracking. Again, I said to you, don't go like automatic because it goes to 10. Actually, it was doing single. I was doing single there. It normally goes to 10. That's too much. You want to start going one at a time and seeing how much type you want to open it up. Notice that if I do that, there it is. Right? Like if I do that, notice what starts to happen. When is it too much? Notice how sometimes maybe the text, you start losing the word. So you want to start controlling that. Let's say I do 3. I'm going to give it 3-point tracking, right? Again, I'm playing with proportions. And I always end up, a lot of type design is proportion, just so you know. Letter forms, the proportions of the strokes is the right proportion, is the right proportion that you can read the character better, right? Now, one thing that I want to show you to make sure that you don't do is I'm going to add more text here so you see how you continue. So now this fills in. I'm interested in it continuing, right? So let me just, I have to pull more out so that it does it. So if I put my cursor here, right, type, place fill holder text, you see there's more text. You pull your endpoints up to that purple line. You'll see a little plus sign there. That plus sign means you have more content. So you click on it, and then you can go to your next page and drop it in there. Do not make another text box. You want to keep it together because what it does is, even if you need to make adjustments, the text will reflow itself, which is always really fantastic. I think if you, otherwise you open yourself up to some major mistakes. I'm just going to warn you about that, which may cost you a lot of money in the long run in a reprint. So that's how it goes. So that's the basic part of it in terms of how to work with setting up this like quote unquote traditional grid. Again, play around and think conceptually, how can I make typography do certain things, right? Some of you were talking about the alignment tool on the Pathfinder. You can certainly use it here as well. For example, if instead of using this A, I want to use that very sort of dramatic A that I made, right? I can, again, you can go ahead and give it a text wrap, and that's my main character, right? So again, this gesture here is, you know, it has to conceptually make sense with what you're trying to do. It's not just a random choice. I want you to not think of randomness. You know, making random choices is not a choice. You have to make choices typographically, structurally, that support the idea that you're trying to go for. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to do another video that's going to show you, I'm going to show you how to do paragraph and character styles using the same document. So I will be doing another video. So I'll chat with you in a minute.